My name is Patricia Holloway. I'm 56 years old. 3 years ago, my brother, my sister, and my mother forged my signature on a $340,000 bank loan. They used my spotless credit to fund a failing restaurant while I sat at their Sunday dinners and smiled. For 18 months, I gathered evidence. I wore a wire. I documented everything. Then, on my mother's 75th birthday, 3 FBI agents walked into her party. What happened next didn't just destroy them financially, it sent 2 of them to federal prison. But before I tell you about the morning U.S. Marshals read my brother his rights in front of 70 witnesses, let me take you back to the phone call that started it all. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets have a price, and silence isn't always weakness. If you're new here, stick around. This one's about patience, evidence, and the moment a quiet accountant decided enough was enough. Hit subscribe. Let's get into it. I grew up in Gastonia, North Carolina, small textile town, the kind where your 3rd grade teacher shows up at your father's funeral 30 years later, because that's what people do. The Holloway family wasn't rich, but we were respectable. My father, James, worked at the Far Yarns Mill for 41 years. My mother, Caroline, taught Sunday school at First Methodist and kept a garden that won ribbons at the county fair. There were 3 of us kids. David, the oldest, born 1961. Linda, the middle, born 1968. And me, Patricia, born 1971. The surprise baby nobody planned for, and nobody quite knew what to do with. David was the golden boy. Tall, charming, the kind of kid who could talk his way out of anything. He sold his first car at 16, his own car, a 1974 Chevy Nova he'd bought with lawn mowing money. Sold it to a neighbor for twice what he'd paid, then talked my father into buying him something better. My father laughed about it for years. "That's my boy," he'd say, "natural salesman." Linda was the beauty, blonde, petite, homecoming court at Ashbrook High School. She married young, 22, to a man named Richard Chen, who managed a furniture store in Charlotte. They had 3 kids in 5 years. My mother loved those grandchildren the way she'd never quite loved me. And then there was me. The quiet one. The bookish one. The one who got a full scholarship to UNC Charlotte and graduated summa cum laude with a degree in accounting. The one who passed her CPA exam on the first try at 23. The one my mother introduced at church as Patricia, she does taxes. I didn't do taxes. I ran forensic audits for mid-sized manufacturing firms and caught embezzlement schemes before they metastasized. But my mother never asked what I actually did. She asked about David's latest sales numbers and Linda's kids' report cards. I learned early that in the Holloway family, being competent wasn't the same as being celebrated. By the time I turned 30, I'd stopped expecting anything different. I had my own life, a corner office on Trade Street in Charlotte, a townhouse with a view, no husband, no kids, no mess. I saw my family on holidays and Sundays. I brought wine. I smiled. I left. It worked fine until March 9th, 2021. That was the day someone became me without asking. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was at my desk reviewing quarterly financials for a textile client when my phone lit up with a number I recognized. First National Bank. I've banked there since 1994. I picked up. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Monica Reeves, customer service representative. She had that bright, scripted tone people use when they're reading off a screen. She said, "Ms. Holloway, I'm calling to confirm some details about the business loan you co-signed last week." I set my pen down. The office went quiet. Outside my window, Trade Street hummed with lunch hour traffic, but I couldn't hear it anymore. I said, "I didn't co-sign a loan." Monica's tone shifted, not bright anymore. "Careful," she said. "Our records show you co-signed a $340,000 commercial loan for Holloway & Sons Restaurant Group on March 9th. The loan was approved yesterday." March 9th, 6 days ago. I'd been in Asheville that entire week, visiting my college roommate Claire for her birthday. I hadn't set foot in a bank. I hadn't signed anything. I asked Monica to send me every document with my signature on it. She said she'd email them within the hour. I thanked her. I hung up. I stared at my computer screen until the monitor went dark. The email arrived at 2:17 p.m. 4 attachments. Loan application, cosigner agreement, personal financial disclosure, tax authorization form. I opened each one slowly, the way you open mail you know is going to hurt. 4 signatures. All mine. Except they weren't. I've signed my name approximately 11,000 times in my professional life. I know the angle of my capital P. I know the loop I make in the double L. I know the exact length of the tail on my lowercase y. These signatures were close, disturbingly close, but wrong. The P had a loop I'd never made. The Y tail was too long. Someone had practiced. Someone had traced. Someone had forged. I printed every page. I opened a new manila folder, the kind with the metal clasp, and wrote one word on the tab in black Sharpie. Fraud. Then I did what accountants do when the numbers stop making sense. I followed the money. The loan proceeds, $340,000, had been dispersed to an account at Piedmont Community Bank. The borrower was listed as Holloway & Sons Restaurant Group, LLC, registered in South Carolina. 3 members listed on the corporate filing: David Holloway, Linda Holloway Chen, Caroline Holloway. My brother, my sister, my mother. Not me. I sat in my office until the cleaning crew arrived at 9 p.m. A woman named Rosa asked if I was okay. I said yes. I wasn't. Before I go further, let me ask you something. Have you ever been the invisible one in your family? The one who worked hardest and got the least credit? If you have, you know exactly what I'm about to tell you. Drop a comment. I read every one. That Sunday, David called. He always called on Sundays. It was our routine. He'd talk for 20 minutes about his week while I half listened and did laundry or meal prep, or anything that let me nod without actually engaging. He was a car salesman. He'd been a car salesman for 34 years across 4 dealerships. Every job ended the same way: personality conflict with management, which was David's way of saying he'd been fired. This particular Sunday, his voice had that up-tempo energy that meant he wanted something. He said, "Patricia, I'm thinking about opening a restaurant. Family business, something classy, Italian maybe. You interested in getting involved?" I folded a towel. I said, "No, thank you." He said, "Just thought I'd ask. You're so good with numbers, you know. Would have been nice to have you on board." I didn't mention the loan. I didn't mention the $340,000. I didn't mention the forged signature. I just said, "Good luck, David," and hung up. 2 months later, Holloway & Sons opened. Strip mall location in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Red canvas awning. Generic Italian menu. Spaghetti, lasagna, chicken parmesan. Nothing you couldn't get at Olive Garden for half the price. My mother posted photos on Facebook. Ribbon cutting ceremony. David in a navy suit holding oversized scissors. Linda beside him in heels she couldn't walk in, smiling like she'd accomplished something. The caption read, "So proud of my children." I wasn't in the photo. I was never in the photos. I hired a private investigator the next week. His name was Marcus Webb, former Charlotte-Mecklenburg police detective, 63 years old, retired 5 years earlier with a pension and a second career that paid better. He charged $150 an hour. I told him I wanted documentation of everything: corporate filings, financial transactions, loan applications, property records, business licenses. Anything with the name Holloway on it. He delivered. The loan money, $340,000, hadn't gone to the restaurant. Not most of it, anyway. Marcus traced the wire transfers. $87,000 went to pay off David's truck, a 2019 Ford F-150 he'd bought on credit and couldn't afford. $52,000 went to Linda's credit card debt, spread across 6 cards. $94,000 went to pay down the second mortgage on my mother's house in Gastonia, the one she'd taken out 3 years earlier to help David when his last dealership let him go. The restaurant got what was left, roughly $107,000. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. By July, Holloway & Sons was bleeding money. Marcus sent me surveillance photos. Empty tables at 7 p.m. on a Friday night. Help wanted signs taped to the front window that never came down. A Yelp page with 2.3 stars and 17 reviews, most of them mentioning cold pasta, rude service, and a dining room that smelled like bleach. By August, they were 2 months behind on the loan payment. First National started calling me. I didn't answer. They sent letters, certified mail, return receipt requested. Urgent notices printed on paper with red borders. Payment past due. Immediate action required. Legal consequences may follow. I kept every letter. I added them to the folder. I also kept going to Sunday dinners. Every Sunday at 5 p.m., I drove the 43 minutes from my townhouse in Charlotte to my mother's house on Hillcrest Drive in Gastonia. I parked on the street. I walked up the cracked concrete path. I knocked on the door even though my mother told me 100 times I didn't need to knock. She'd opened the door wearing an apron that said, "Blessed beyond measure," and smelling like pot roast and Estee Lauder perfume. She'd hug me the way she hugged everyone at church. Brief, obligatory, already thinking about the next thing. David would be in the living room watching a game. Linda would be in the kitchen mashing potatoes and talking about her kids' soccer schedules. I'd bring a bottle of wine, Sauvignon Blanc, the cheap kind from Harris Teeter. I'd pour myself a glass. I'd sit at the table in the chair I'd sat in since 1983, the one closest to the kitchen, farthest from the head where my father used to sit, and David sat now. We'd eat. David would talk about the restaurant like it was thriving. He'd say things like, "We're just hitting a few growing pains," and "You know how it is in the restaurant business. First year's always tough." Linda would nod and agree and talk about how her kids loved the lasagna. My mother would smile and say she was so proud, so blessed, so grateful her children were doing something together. Nobody mentioned my name on a $340,000 loan. Nobody mentioned that First National was calling me 6 times a week. Nobody mentioned that my credit score, pristine for 32 years, was about to nosedive into collections territory. I sat at that table and ate green beans and listened to them lie with the fluency of people who'd been doing it their whole lives. In November, I contacted an attorney. Her name was Gloria Chen, no relation to Linda's husband. She specialized in financial fraud and elder abuse. I sat in her office on the 14th floor of a building on Tryon Street and laid out the timeline. The forged signatures, the fraudulent loan, the money trail, the Sunday dinners where nobody said a word. Gloria listened without interrupting. She was 58, gray hair pulled back tight, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. When I finished, she took off her glasses and said 3 words. Call the FBI. The FBI field office in Charlotte is on West Trade Street, 14 minutes from my apartment. I called on a Monday morning at 9 a.m. A woman answered. Professional. Clipped. I told her I wanted to report bank fraud and identity theft involving a family member. She took my name and number. She said someone would contact me within 48 hours. They called back in 36. I met with Special Agent Rachel Kincaid and her partner, Special Agent Thomas Liu, on a Thursday afternoon in a windowless conference room on the 3rd floor of the Federal Building. The room smelled like burnt coffee and industrial carpet. There was a table, 4 chairs, a whiteboard, and a clock on the wall that ticked loud enough to count. I brought the folder, the manila one with the metal clasp. I'd added to it over the months, bank statements, wire transfer records, corporate filings, my own financial records showing I'd never received a penny. I laid it on the table between us. Agent Kincaid was 42, dark hair, no wedding ring, the kind of woman who looked like she ran marathons before work. She opened the folder. She read every page. Agent Liu took notes in a small black notebook, his pen moving in quick, efficient strokes. When she finished, Kincaid looked up and asked the question I'd been waiting for. Are you certain you want to proceed with this? These are your family members. If we open a case, there's no walking it back. I said, I'm an accountant. I deal in certainties. She nodded. She said, we'll open a case. For the next 9 months, I lived 2 lives. At Sunday dinners, I was Patricia, the quiet younger sister, the one who showed up on time with wine and a smile, the one who listened to David talk about turning the restaurant around, the one who nodded when Linda said they just needed 1 more good quarter, the one who helped my mother clear plates and load the dishwasher while she talked about how blessed she was to have children who cared about family. At the FBI field office, I was Patricia Holloway, complainant in case file CR 2021-4738. Federal fraud investigation, wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. I wore a wire, twice. The first time was Thanksgiving 2021. Dinner at my mother's house. 23 people. Turkey, ham, 7 side dishes, 3 pies. The wire was taped to my ribs under a loose sweater, a small black device the size of a pack of gum with a microphone no bigger than a shirt button. Agent Kincaid had fitted it herself in the parking lot of a Starbucks 2 hours before dinner. I sat at the table between David and a cousin I hadn't seen in 5 years. I ate sweet potato casserole. I asked careful questions. David answered them. So did Linda. So did my mother. I said, David, how's the loan situation going? I heard First National's been calling. David laughed. He actually laughed. He said, yeah, they've been calling you too, huh? Don't worry about it. We're getting it sorted. You know how banks are. They panic if you're a day late. I said, they told me I'm listed as a cosigner. He said, well, yeah, we put you down. You've got great credit, Trish. Helped us get a better rate. We'll pay it off, don't worry. Family takes care of family. Linda chimed in from across the table. You've always been so generous, Patricia. We really appreciate you. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand. She said, that's what family does. We help each other. I smiled. I said, of course. The second time I wore a wire was Christmas. Same house, different menu. Same lies. This time I asked about the money. I said, David, I saw on the corporate filings that the loan went to Piedmont Bank, not First National. How does that work? David didn't miss a beat. He said, oh, that's just how they structured it for tax purposes. The accountant recommended it. You'd understand it better than me, honestly. It's all above board. It wasn't above board. It was fraud. And now I had him on tape saying it. The restaurant closed in January 2022. No announcement. No goodbye post on Facebook. The lights just went dark one Tuesday and never came back on. The help wanted sign stayed in the window. The red awning faded to pink in the sun. David filed for bankruptcy in February. Chapter 7. Personal bankruptcy. Wiped out everything. Credit cards, truck loan, personal debts. Everything except the First National loan. You can't bankrupt your way out of fraud. In March, the loan officially defaulted. First National's legal department sent me a letter. Notice of default and demand for payment. I was being sued. Personally. For $340,000, plus 18 months of accrued interest at 7.2%, plus legal fees, plus court costs. The total came to $387,412. I forwarded the letter to Agent Kincaid. She called me back in 40 minutes. She said, "We're ready to move." On April 12, 2022, a federal grand jury in the Western District of North Carolina returned indictments against David Charles Holloway, Linda Holloway Chen, and Caroline Ruth Holloway. 3 counts each: bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud. Felonies, federal felonies. The arrests were scheduled for April 16th, my mother's 75th birthday party. If you're still with me, you know what's coming next. And if you're thinking I should have warned them, I want you to ask yourself this. Would you? Hit subscribe, because what happens next is everything. The party was at the VFW Hall on East Garrison Boulevard in Gastonia. My mother had rented it for $200. She'd invited 70 people, church friends, neighbors, relatives from 3 states, people she hadn't spoken to in years but wanted to impress. Catered lunch from a place in Charlotte, honey glazed ham, green beans, mac and cheese, rolls. A cake shaped like a Bible because my mother loved reminding people she'd been Methodist for 53 years. I arrived at 11:30 a.m. I parked near the back of the lot. I carried a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite. I walked into the VFW hall, and the smell hit me first. Ham and industrial air freshener, and that particular mix of perfume and hairspray that hangs around groups of churchwomen over 60. My mother stood near the entrance in a lavender dress, greeting people as they arrived. She saw me and smiled. She said, "Patricia, you made it." She hugged me, brief, tight. She smelled like Estee Lauder and vanilla cake. I said, "Happy birthday, Mom." I found a table near the back. I sat with 2 cousins I hadn't seen since my father's funeral. They asked what I'd been up to. I said, "Same old, work, clients, you know." They nodded. They didn't know. Nobody ever asked me about work. At 12:15 p.m., the front doors opened. 3 people walked in. 2 men in dark suits, 1 woman. They weren't dressed for a birthday party. The woman was Special Agent Rachel Kincaid. She walked across the room with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It happened in sections. The people near the door first, then the tables in the middle, then everyone. Kincaid stopped in front of my mother. She said, "Caroline Holloway?" My mother smiled, confused, polite. The smile she used with strangers. She said, "Yes?" Kincaid pulled out a badge. She said, "Special Agent Rachel Kincaid, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You're under arrest for bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud." My mother's smile didn't disappear. It froze, like someone had hit pause mid-frame. Kincaid continued, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." One of the male agents, Agent Lou, walked toward the buffet table. David was standing there with a plate of ham. Lou said, "David Holloway, you're under arrest." David dropped the plate. It hit the linoleum and shattered, ham and china everywhere. The 3rd agent walked outside the parking lot. Linda had seen them come in. She'd tried to leave. They arrested her next to her Honda Odyssey, with the stick figure family decal on the back window. My mother looked around the room, 70 faces staring. She said, "There's been a mistake." Kincaid said, "Ma'am, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." My mother's eyes found me. I was sitting at the back table. I hadn't moved. She stared at me, not with anger, with confusion, like she was trying to solve a math problem that didn't make sense. I stared back. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just sat there with my hands folded on the table in front of me. David was shouting, something about rights, about lawyers, about this being harassment. Linda was crying in the parking lot. My mother went quiet. She let them cuff her. She didn't resist. They walked her out of the VFW hall in front of 70 witnesses, past the buffet table, past the Bible cake, past the people from her Sunday school class, and her garden club, and the women she'd known for 40 years. I sat at my table and didn't move. A cousin leaned over. She whispered, "Patricia, what's happening?" I said, "They forged my signature on a loan. I reported them." She went pale. She didn't ask anything else. Take a breath. If you just realized you've been holding it, hit that like button, because this isn't over yet. The case went to trial on November 14th, 2022. Federal Court, Western District of North Carolina, Charlotte Division. The Honorable Judge Martin Whitlock presiding. The prosecution called 14 witnesses: bank employees, handwriting experts, Marcus Webb, my private investigator, Agent Kincaid, and me. I testified for 4 hours. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Nicole Brennan, walked me through the timeline. The phone call from Monica Reeves, the forged signatures, the money trail, the Sunday dinners where they smiled and lied, the recordings from Thanksgiving and Christmas. The defense attorney, a man named Douglas Pryor, who wore expensive suits and spoke in a voice like warm honey, tried to make me the villain. He asked if I'd ever told my family I was upset. I said no. He asked if I'd ever confronted them privately before going to the FBI. I said no. He asked if I understood that I was sending my own mother to prison. I said, I understand I'm holding my family accountable for stealing my identity and destroying my credit to fund a business they never intended to repay. The courtroom was silent. The defense rested after 2 days. They called character witnesses, people from church who said my mother was a good woman, former coworkers who said David was charming, Linda's husband Richard, who testified that Linda had been manipulated by David and my mother, that she'd only signed the documents because they told her to. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. Guilty. All 3 counts. All 3 defendants. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. David, 6 years, federal prison, full restitution. Linda, 4 years, federal prison, full restitution. My mother, 2 years, house arrest with electronic monitoring, full restitution, 3 years supervised probation. The judge, Judge Whitlock, 68 years old, white hair, a man who'd been on the bench for 22 years, looked at my mother before he handed down her sentence. He said, Mrs. Holloway, you raised this woman. You taught her right from wrong. And then you used her name, her credit, her trust to commit fraud. The court finds this particularly egregious given the familial relationship. My mother cried. Real tears. Not the polite kind she used at funerals. The ugly kind. David didn't cry. He stared straight ahead. Linda sobbed into her hands. First National dropped their lawsuit against me the day the verdicts came in. My credit score recovered within 18 months. I'm 56 years old now. I live in a townhouse in Charlotte with a view of the city skyline. I see my brother's name in the federal inmate locator sometimes. David Charles Holloway, register number 24387-056, FCI Butner Medium I, release date August 2028. Linda's at FPC Alderson in West Virginia. She'll be out next year. My mother sends letters. She's written 43 of them in the past 2 years. I keep them in a drawer, unopened. I don't read them because I know what they say. They say she's sorry. They say she didn't mean for it to go this far. They say families should forgive. But forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. I learned that from a therapist I started seeing 3 months after the trial. Her name is Dr. Ellen Morris. She's 62. She told me once, you can forgive someone and still decide they're not safe to have in your life. I haven't forgiven them. I'm not sure I will. But I also don't think about them the way I used to. I don't carry the folder anymore. It sits in my office closet. Manila cover faded to tan. Metal clasp rusted at the corners. I haven't opened it in 2 years. I don't need to. I remember every page. Last month I got a promotion. Senior forensic accountant, corner office, 12-person team. I celebrated by taking myself to dinner at a steakhouse on South Tryon Street. I ordered the filet, medium rare. I drank a glass of wine that cost more than the bottle I used to bring to Sunday dinners. I sat alone at a table by the window and watched the city lights come on as the sun went down. I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. If you've ever had to choose between your peace and your family, you already know what that freedom costs. And you already know it's worth it. Drop a comment. Tell me your story. I read every single one. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If this story reminded you that protecting yourself isn't selfish, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Check the description below for another story about the quiet ones who keep receipts. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.